So we'll talk just briefly, influences, how I got started, what I paint, pandemic, some real art, small, and go from there. Okay. All right, so let's do it that way. Okay, now you can see that full screen. Excellent. Okay, very good. Thank you. So this, when I think about the influences, the first thing I think about is my mother, Ruth Hunt, and my earliest memories of art are all connected with her, and she was painting in oil from the time before I could remember, before I was born. And when I was very young, my original passion for art was sparked by watching her paint and smelling the turpentine, the whole bit. It was very intertwined. And so that's really the original reason that I became very interested and passionate about art. Also, there was a gentleman on the local television every Saturday morning that some of you my age may remember, John Nagy. He preceded Bob Ross. In fact, he mentored Bob Ross, but he had an early Saturday morning TV show, and a lot of kids would tune in and watch, and he would show you the magic of being able to draw. And I was fascinated and drawn in by it all, and I was amazed to learn that they still sell his drawing kits today. But watching John Nagy on Saturday morning was their influence for my early interest. And of course, we can't forget that Irvington has been a great source of artists over time. And just one example that I highlight is William Forsythe, who lived right there at the corner of South Emerson and Washington, close to where I went to high school. And one of his paintings, Poppies. And so I think about the great tradition in our East Side area. This is an individual Do Crapo that I worked with quite a bit in my early teen years. She had an informal painting group in her basement of her home on Pleasant Run Parkway. And I was the only one probably under 45 that was a member of the group. I was a young teenager. And we'd all go down to Do's basement and paint for 3 or 4 hours on a weeknight, once a week, and she would critique our work and give us hints. And I was very happy to find that this painting, which is one of the few oils that she did, and I remember her working on this in the early 70s, actually is part of the collection of this Historical Society. So a lot of fun for me and kind of full circle. So getting started, my mother, as I mentioned, watched me draw a lot, and I began to bug her. I wanted to paint like she did. And so finally, I think it was when I was in 6th grade, could have been earlier, she turned me loose. She said, "There's my art set, you know how it works, knock yourself out." And so this is the very first painting I did. She actually saved it. As funny as that is, I set up some pool balls, still life, painted it, painted 2 or 3 more, and she said, "Okay, you're serious." And then she got me hooked up with some people who could help mentor me and kind of get me started down the path. So this is a painting that I did when I was about 16, I think. So this is kind of where I had come to over the course of a few years. I was already interested more in people, kind of candid scenes. This was from a magazine photo, and I just was intrigued by this old guy looking out a window, and I painted this in oil. So life goes on, right? You graduate from high school, you have a career, you get married, you have a family. So I kind of retired from art for many years. And as I neared my retirement, I got really interested again in starting art, and got started again in 2010, prior to retirement in 2014. And so at that point, I began to move back into art very strongly. And I focused on people, places, and things again, because that's what I really liked. So this is a portrait. I've been very interested in portraits. I actually took a photograph of my wife one time. We were eating lunch. I don't think she was even aware at the moment I took this photograph. The light was coming in from the side, and I thought it was just a really interesting interplay of light in her face, and she was kind of looking down. And so I captured her image and later painted this in a class that I was participating on, learning more about painting and painting portraits. Used it for a study. This is a painting that I did. Our daughter-in-law Autumn Hunt shared this with me. It's our youngest son, Emery, and he was just painting outside the window. And I love this image. It's very candid. It kind of shows, you know, it's kind of fun because it looks like he's painting outside the picture frame. But I love the interplay of light and just the fact it's an ordinary scene of life. And so it was a great chance to kind of practice painting people and everyday things. On vacation, I take pictures, and this is a picture I took down in Bridgetown at the fish market in Barbados. And this woman sitting there cleaning fish. Everybody's busy, they're working. Work fascinates me. I could watch it all day, right? And so I took this photograph amongst several others and painted this woman's image from the photograph. I thought it was just an interesting scene, and again, learning more about painting portraits again and getting into that. This is Stan Densky. Some of you may know him from Facebook. I just found his Facebook profile interesting. Nothing about Stan necessarily one way or the other, but I thought he had an interesting, fascinating, and he's a fascinating guy. And I loved his Facebook profile picture, and I just met with Stan. I said, hey, Stan, can I paint your picture, because I'm trying to learn more about painting portraits, and I love that picture. And he said, sure, go ahead. And so I used that photograph, painted his picture, again, trying to come up on the curve, get a little better. In Venice, Italy, I take a lot of pictures again on vacation. Found this guy in a Hawaiian shirt in Venice, Italy, of all places, leaning up against the side of a building and being all spiffy, and took his photograph and had a lot of fun painting that. It's just a very interesting image. Again, from that theme of work fascinates me, I could watch it all the time. This is a gentleman working at the Indiana State Fair Pioneer Village building in 2018. And this gentleman, I'm looking over his shoulder, so I'm looking through my eyes, I guess, and I like the interplay of the light shining on his workspace there. The strap on his overalls is falling down, and all the clutter on his desk there. I just thought this was a fascinating image, and I really enjoy painting this kind of stuff. His wife actually recognized immediately. I entered it the next year in the fair, and she contacted me. She said, the minute I saw that strap falling down over his shirt, I knew that was my husband, and they ended up buying the paint. So, brief cautionary tale for artists out there. Artists are not always the best at reading all the instructions or knowing. So, to take off, I spent about 40 plus hours planning and designing. I decided in 2019 I wanted to enter a poster for the Halloween contest. Spent a lot of time designing, planning, thinking. I had to get permission to paint the house. I mean, all this stuff. And entered this, and at the end of the time, I was disqualified because I had forgotten that one little thing. I hadn't put the year 2019 into the image. So it never got to be judged, or it sits in the back of my closet now as kind of a cautionary tale that artists also need to read instructions too. So just kind of fun stuff. This is an image kind of coming back to some of those East Side businesses. It's two paintings. The painting on the left was the first one I painted. The painting on the right was the second one. This is, a lot of folks may recognize Tim and Julie's Another Fine Mess on East 10th Street. Great place for salvage antiques. Highly recommended. I love both Tim and Julie. This picture taken by Warren Beale, a friend of mine. He said he nearly wrecked the car when he saw this Tim up on a ladder and Julie underneath supporting the ladder. He had to stop and get this photograph, and so I'm thankful he did. I saw it on Instagram, and he allowed me to paint it. There's Tim up on the ladder. Julie looks a little nervous underneath the ladder, hoping Tim won't fall off. Painted the first one on the left and liked it, but I wanted to paint it larger and more detailed, so I went at it again, and the one on the right has a lot more detail. I included a lot of the clutter that I'd taken out before, and just had a lot of fun with that. More than that, this particular building was the former East Side Art Center, where I actually used to go with my mother when I was 4, 5, 6 years old and watch her paint. So I still go into that building today and think about that. Sometimes you just see an ordinary object and it appeals to you. It's kind of fun. And so taking a walk in, and we were in Carmel, and I saw this fire plug with peeling paint, and the light was falling on it just a certain way. You take a photograph, and it's kind of a fun diversion. You can paint something kind of different. There's actually somebody in Irvington who purchased this painting because their son was a firefighter and loves fire plugs, so it all works. This, of course, the Steer Inn up on 10th and Emerson, another iconic Irvington landmark, and a place that resonates for me. This is, again, a photograph that Warren Beale posted on Instagram that he gave me permission to paint. And that particular building is interesting as well for me because when I was probably about 13 years old, they allowed some local artists to post art on their wall and sell it if they could. And that's the very first place that my art was ever publicly displayed when I was very young. Irvington Masonic Temple building at night. This was another Warren Beale photograph. I've got kind of a series of these. Warren kind of wandered around and took really interesting photographs. So this is a nocturne, and it's the back of the building. It's not what you might think of, but it's an interesting angle. It's the old Irvington vinyl store that used to be there at the back, and you can kind of see through the windows, and it has kind of an eerie effect to it. I love all the detail and kind of seeing through the windows and so forth. So I found this a fascinating image to paint and represent for our local community. I like to paint the Irvington Theater marquee a lot. It tends to be one of my more popular images that I represent. And this particular image here of the Irvington Theater is in probably the closest I get to an abstract style. There was a gentleman, Charles Demuth, in the 1920s who anticipated the rise of modernism and painted in the style we now call precisionism or precisionist style. And so this, to put a little twist on just the traditional Irving Theater marquee, is painted in the precisionist style to kind of abstract the vision a little bit. Sometimes one thing leads to another in art. I was out with another Irvington artist, well known to the Historical Society, William Lawson, and we were painting in plein air on South Audubon. And this is Peg's in Irvington, a salon. And so we were set up across the street, and we just painted this in plein air. It looks a little looser, a little rougher than some of my other paintings because it's plein air. And of course, you have to be a little looser and quicker in your painting when you're doing that sort of work. And turned out reasonably well for me for a plein air, but later I wanted to make sure I got the correct title on this painting, and I had to go back and I had to make sure I had a picture of the sign because I couldn't remember exactly what the building, exactly what the business was called. I went back, took some photographs, make sure I had a photograph of the sign, and when I looked at my photograph, I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, that photograph that I had taken of the building, that literally is a painting. And so I went back and actually the painting that I'd originally taken just as a reference for what the sign was in front of the building became a painting. And I actually painted this in pieces and posted it on Facebook and Irvington Neighbors and had a lot of fun with this as people watched it come together. This was a painting. I was rushing over to one of our other son's house on South Ritter, trying to get there before the sunset went down because it was a beautiful sunset. I'm riding west on Washington Street, right at the intersection of Arlington, and I'm realizing I'm not going to make it. This sunset is fading so quickly; it's going to be gone even by the time I get to South Ritter. So I snap a photograph through the windshield of my car and hope for the best, and actually got a pretty good shot out of that, and it made a really interesting painting, I think, especially the juxtaposition of the street lights against the cars coming out with just dark enough now that the lights are coming on and so forth. So it was a lot of fun. Again, similar, looking at buildings and the way the light plays, and iconic Irvington locations. This is the Audubon Court Apartments. You're looking at the south side, looking north here, and watching the way the light kind of hits on the bricks in the building and some of the interesting interplay there, kind of simplifying that composition a little bit. So kind of going back to that theme now a little bit more of kind of capturing those moments. Of course, we all remember Blackacre had a devastating fire at their East Washington Street location back in December. And immediately the day after the fire on Facebook, Blackacre thanked everyone in Irvington for the outpouring of support, hoping that they would continue in business, hoping that they could keep it going. And they said, well, we're just going to try something. Our warm air beer garden, we're going to open it up. It's middle of winter, but we're going to try it. And it was a good day. It was sunny. You can still see out there. But they opened it up. A couple, 300 people show up, and I was there drinking a little beer and taking some photographs for reference. And I liked the way this one turned out. I love the sign they posted. Everything's burnt but the beer. So I thought this was a great kind of entree into the pandemic series that I'm doing currently, which shows, you know, the resilience of businesses and people being supportive in our local community to what stuff happens and how we have to react and plan. So my pandemic series is the one that I'm currently working on. I don't normally work series, but when the pandemic hit, it really occurred to me that this was an opportunity to capture some really unique scenes, capture those moments, and that's what I've been focusing on really for the last 5 months or so. So one of the first photographs that I took, I was inside the Irvington Legend Cafe early on into the pandemic. They just had to close their dining area. We were picking up dinner there, and you could still come into the restaurant at that particular time to do the pickup. And I wandered in, and Kim Roberts, the co-owner there, was taking phone calls in the bar area because that was the only way they could keep their kitchen going and continue to go, was to take phone calls. And so she's there taking orders as husband John's helping in the kitchen and getting orders out, but just her all by herself in what would normally be a very busy bar area, I thought made a very interesting scene in the very beginning of my pandemic series. And of course, we're getting Giacomo's Pizza every once in a while for pickup, and Giacomo's very early on figured out some clever ways to deal with what the pandemic had dealt them. And here's move the podium out into the parking lot. It's still cold here early on, and so they figured out a way to make it work. And she's greeting customers out there in the parking lot and getting your orders out. And here's one of the girls actually carrying the pizzas out to the car. Again, just kind of taking some photographs as I'm there, and I'm just, you know, their people are social distancing, kind of standing away as they're there to pick up. I find that a fascinating visage of the times we live in. Went back to the Steer Inn as part of the pandemic series because the Steer Inn had suddenly decided their old restaurant, designed in 1962 as a drive-in, suddenly was absolutely what every restaurant would give their right arm for. A place where you drive up and have service to the car, and so they had a path forward. And so both the Steer Inn and the car hops talked to that. They were very enthusiastic about participating in the project. And so I took several reference photographs and painted a couple of paintings of people working as car hops at the Steer Inn. And for this one, the painting is in the center. On the right-hand side, I posted the original photo reference. And in the photo reference, it was a reasonably good picture. The model was very concerned. She said, "Be sure you show my pants. I'm known for my wide pants. That's what everybody looks for when I serve them. So that I love, you know, just make sure you paint those." So, okay. So this one was a good angle for that. And but her hands weren't doing anything very interesting. The leg was at an odd angle. So as an artist, you're allowed to interpret that a little bit. I placed a drink in one hand and a bag in the other, and turned her leg around a little bit and made the painting a little more interesting. But just a little insight of how you can kind of deal with that a little bit as an artist. This was another from another photograph that I took the same day, again showing here's somebody social distancing, they're wearing their mask, they're taking their order on the iPad from somebody in the car, reading from a menu, and they figured out how to deal with it. This was one of the most interesting ones just from a happenstance. I'm walking down East Washington Street. and you've seen James Dant, the clothier there on Eastern Washington Street a million times. And he posted this wonderful sign that I'd seen before, Hoosiers will see it through. And I'd actually taken pictures of that sign. I thought, man, I got to figure out how to work that sign into a painting. I love that sign. So I'm walking down the street, and he just pops out of the door. And I'd not ever met Tommy Dant before, but I'm just standing there almost face to face with him looking at this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's a painting. And so I'm quickly explaining to him who this crazy guy is, and like, hey, I paint portraits. That's what I do. And I would really like to paint your portrait together with your sign. And he's like, well, okay. And he agreed on the spot. And I took some really quick photographs with my cell phone. And this one I thought turned out especially well. And so I turned this into a good size 16 by 20 painting. And I was really, really pleased with the way it came out and capturing just kind of that look of determination in his eyes. And I thought his sign really captured what we're all going through. So I thought it was great. In similar focus, and this is the first time I've shown this publicly, this is one that I've just finished. This is Nate Old. And Nate opened the 1979 leather shop, or the 1979 company, I think he calls it, right on South Audubon in the bottom of what used to be the old drugstore right there, catty-cornered across from where the old mug was. And I walked by the window and I see this guy working in leather there. And you can see him through the plate glass window. And I'm suddenly struck again. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a painting. And so I run inside the door and I explain who I am. I quickly showing a couple of images on my phone. And I said, can I paint your portrait? Can I capture you? And he was very good about it, all about it. He said, oh yeah, sure. And so he kind of impromptu posed with me as he's working on one of his leather wallets there. And thought, gave me a great image. And I just shared this with him last night, and he's pleased with it. And I think it turned out really good. And again, I think it's emblematic of, finding a way to work through it. He just, when he needs, a customer comes in, he pulls the scarf up, that's his mask, and he's ready to go. So just another person working through finding a way to get through the pandemic. So this is a quick one. There's not a lot of folks on. This is just kind of thrown in for fun. Sometimes I'll do unexpected things, or you don't always recognize everything by known artists. And this is a very, very famous world artist who painted, and he was hanging out with a bunch of friends, and they happened to be at a medical college, and one of them thought it would be funny, well, we'll stick a cigarette in the skeleton's mouth that they use for teaching at the medical college, and that would look pretty funny. And this guy said, well, that's pretty cool, I think I'll paint that. Well, that guy's name is Vincent van Gogh. But one of his lesser known works, but shows you that sometimes you can get a pretty interesting image doing something unexpected. Well, don't worry, we're almost done here. So Real Art Small, I wanted to just talk very briefly about that. Devin Shively and myself as artist collaborators, realizing that a lot of folks don't want to step up immediately and buy large, expensive works of art. So how could we make it a little more affordable, offer something for entry level? So Devin and I collaborate on Real Art Small. This is our setup last year at the Irvington Halloween Fest inside the Masonic building while it's raining cats and dogs outside, so we stayed dry. But showing a lot of the really small pieces, and we try to keep everything under $100 if we can, do a variety of small pieces, and trying to get people kind of started on that journey of collecting and really interested in fine art. There's a kind of a close of one of the little 5-inch by 5-inch pieces that I do. The theater marquee turns out to be one of my more popular pieces, to kind of give you an example close up. Here's some pieces by Devin. Devin actually entered these in a pandemic themed show that the Cumberland Arts Group is doing right now. Devin does a lot of work in encaustic, which is really interesting stuff. It's melted wax, and she abstracts a little more than I do, but the visage on the right is actually a representation of the park there. in Cumberland, and closed off with the fencing that they had during the time when we had our original letdown in the spring, as people were concerned about people, using play equipment or anything. So she kind of interspersed that with some of her abstraction, and she does really great, interesting work. Some more small pieces from Devin, again, the encaustic and mixed media. And again, we kind of feature our work together because it complements. We come from very different ideas on how we do our work. So I think it's a fun combination. You can see by the acorn there how the size representation. I do some encaustics. I like to do fun stuff. This is a series that I've done on old sideshow banners, which I find interesting. Some of them I've invented myself. Some of them I've taken from vintage examples, but I think these are fun, and these are mostly 4 inches by 6 inches, painting those. And some other things that I do, again, in the small format, kind of focusing in on some things, but just doing some fun stuff and having fun with that in Real Art Small. What next? What's for the future? Well, for plan paintings, I've actually been following around a couple of times here recently, some of the Black Hat Society and the Irvington Witches. And they very graciously allowed me to tag along to some of the walks that they've done. And I think I've got some really interesting material. So you see one of the witches here, and they're wearing masks, of course, and socially distancing, but they're still doing a lot for kind of bringing some cheer, if you will, to the community during the time of the pandemic. And I think they're another aspect of how we're reacting positively in such challenging times. So looking forward to that. And I've got several just to work on, so that's going to be one of my next ones. So that's coming attractions. We'll have some images coming from that. So that's pretty much, as I indicate here, the whole tomato. And interested, if you've got any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. My email I've listed here, bob@artsandevent.com, or certainly I have a Facebook, Robert Hunt on Facebook, and Real Art Small is also, Devin and I have a Facebook page, and you're able to send us any questions. You're also able to see photographs on that Facebook page of work that both Devin and I have done. So thank you again for the opportunity, and let me know if there's any questions.
Great.
Just a comment, Bob. This is Steve Barnett. You are probably one of the few artists who live in or associate with Irvington who actually paint Irvington, and that's wonderful. I mean, you and Will Lawson, I think, have contributed so much to not only the art history of the community, but painting the community as it is today, and that, I think, is worthy of great applause. And you do fine work. I mean, gosh, just beautiful stuff.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think it is a community, and I if somebody has the opportunity to look at something 50 years ago, I always find it interesting to just see, it's a glimpse back, right? And if somebody looks at something 50 years ago and say, it's walking down the street and I ran into somebody or I saw something, what would it look like? What would it be? So I'm pretty much wedded to the realist style, but that's the whole idea. I like ordinary scenes, ordinary people, sometimes doing extraordinary things, but that's the whole emphasis of my art. And Irvington, I just find a rich source of material. Honestly, I could spend the rest of my life painting things at Irvington and never run out.
Well,
and still
with your focus on people, you certainly find a lot of characters here.
True.
Bob, Sandy wants you to speak a little bit about your recent courthouse painting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't have a picture of that because it wasn't Irvington focused, but Sandy Hall, who is someone that I have known for many years and collaborated with on art, and we paint together still once a week, a great painting group in Greenfield. And I recently, the Indiana Plein Air Painters Association sponsored in cooperation with the Department of Natural Resources, as coordinated through Paul Diebold, who's of course on there at the Irvington Historical Society and an Irvington resident too, to have paintings of historic buildings on the National Register throughout the state of Indiana. And I knew I wanted to paint something, and I settled on painting the historic county courthouse there in Greenfield, in downtown Greenfield. And I was fortunate that was accepted and will be part of the traveling exhibit for the DNR that will be taking place later this year and through the beginning of next. But happy to be a part of that. That was fun. And I don't have an image of that, so I apologize. I don't. But that was a fun one. So that will be submitted and be part of that traveling exhibit. Thank you, Sandy.
Question from Paula. Your work is some large, some small. How long does it take you to complete a painting?
It's variable, and I would say it used to be when I first started that I might work on a painting for a couple of months. I was only painting maybe once or twice a week. I tend to be a lot more focused on my painting now. So most of the time, I like to try to finish a large painting in a week or two, if I possibly can. And some paintings just go together. Some paintings just work. You start, and really from the very beginning, you can kind of see it coming together, and you can feel it, or there's just certain indeterminate things, and it just all seems to come together and work really well. Some you struggle with, and some you're like, and you kind of have to set it aside, walk away from it from a week, and then come back to it, and suddenly see all the things that you didn't see before, and it's easier to finish it off. So I would say right now, on average, it's taking me a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks to finish a painting. So I have, like the James Dant, I did that in less than a week because it just all worked. But I normally work on 2 or sometimes 3 paintings at a time, and I'll just kind of rotate them because if you just, I find for me personally, if I bear down on one, that you get so focused as you can't see the forest for the trees. And I frequently stop, and I rely on people like Devin and Autumn and a mentoring group I'm associated with Patrick Saunders, and I'll ask Sandy and other people, hey, what do you see? And they'll frequently see things that I just don't see because I'm too close to it. So they offer me good advice, and then I come back to it and finish it off. The small paintings, I could knock those out pretty quickly, usually in a couple of hours or less is my goal on those.
One follow-up question. Do you still like the smell of turpentine?
Makes me very nostalgic. No, it's true. I mean, you hardly ever smell it now because almost no artist uses it. It's kind of viewed as toxic. Yeah. And admissions on turpentine. So we were someplace visiting or traveling or whatever, and there was an artist working outside. They use an older guy, and as I came even close, I could smell turpentine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hadn't smelled that forever, not since the 70s, regularly. And so I stood around and he was painting outside. He said, well, you know, he still uses turpentine because he's a traditionalist. But I just love the smell of that turpentine. And when Prism Art Supply went out of business here, about a year or so ago, I'll confess that as I went in, they were having their super sale stuff, 80% off. There was a couple of quarts of turpentine that were marked 80% off. And I said, I'm going to get some. So I've got 2 quarts of turpentine. I'm ready.
Thanks, Robert.
A couple of times when you were describing your paintings, you mentioned the clutter in the paintings, and I found the detail of those especially interesting. when you are, do you usually paint from a photograph that you've taken? And then how much editing do you think you do? Because it seems like you like to leave in the clutter. What's your kind of thought process on that?
Well, I probably have a cluttered brain, so I probably, one of the frequent critiques that I get from folks about my paintings is, you know, simplify, simplify, simplify. And if you look at an Edward Hopper, he's kind of at the far end of the scale of, I mean, I recently looked at the Edward Hopper exhibit that's currently at the Newfields. And if you have a chance, I would strongly advise that because it's just a great exhibit. And I'm going to actually go again next week with someone else to look at that again. And I'm looking forward to that. But he doesn't put a painting on the wall. There's no glass in the windows. There's nothing anywhere. I mean, he's absolutely minimalist. I like the clutter a little bit. I like, because it feels more everyday. It feels more realistic, but I do edit things out. Sometimes it's like, yeah, it just doesn't make sense, or yeah, this just gets in the way, or and sometimes that's one of the failings that I have as an artist. I want to paint everything, and that's where I rely on the people who critique my paintings. They'll look at that and they'll say, "Don't do that. That's distracting. It's taking away from your main focus." So I'm trying to get more aware of including it when it tells the narrative, but not letting it distract from my focal point.
Speaking of leaving things out, Harry Davis told the story once. He painted an office building downtown, and it was a commission piece, and he was presenting it at with the board and other officers of the organization. And this one executive came up to him and said, "I like your painting. The only problem is, are you trying to tell me something that I don't know? You didn't include my office window."
Oh my.
So Harry said afterwards, he said, "That's why I take pictures, so I can count the windows."
Yeah.
But, that might be a way of letting people know that either you're in favor or they are out of favor.
Yeah, Harry Davis is definitely one of my all-time favorite Indiana artists, and you have several stunning pieces of his. He is at the far end. I mean, he has a lot. I'm probably too ADHD to paint with the precision and the detail that Harry painted with. I just find his paintings absolutely amazing, but I don't think I would ever have the discipline to.
Well, your painting of the Masonic Lodge building sort of reminded me of Harry's.
Well,
he had a lot of detail there.
Right. Well, thank you very much. But Harry was nice by himself for sure.
Yeah.
I love his work. But thank you. That's interesting. You always wonder what people will really notice of a painting, and it is funny to hear that sometimes.
Well, Robert, the other comments in the chat are thanking you for your presentation and how enjoyable your presentation was today. Thank you. I certainly enjoyed it. Do you have any other thoughts you want to wrap up with and leave us with today?
Not anything directly, but I'll put in a quick ad for the Irvington Historical Society. Anyone who hasn't seen Rita Spalding's work currently at the Irvington Historical Society over there at the Bana, it's not to miss. I mean, Rita is one of the finest artists working anywhere in Indiana right now, and she's literally right there in South Irvington. And I'm so happy to see that you're doing a show featured on her work, and anybody that's not familiar with Rita's work absolutely needs to get in there and see the wonderful, wonderful pieces she is creating. It's just absolutely amazing. She's somebody with a national reputation that we have right there in Irvington today that's creating a formidable portfolio and doing very well. And I'm excited too. I talked to my friend Beth Clary Schwer day before yesterday in Irvington, and in Greenfield, excuse me. And she told me that she'll be opening up a gallery of her work there on East Washington Street, the old guitar shop, coming up here soon. So she has a national reputation because of her work being featured in the HGTV show Good Bones. And I've known Beth from the time she first started kind of painting again, like myself, at an older age again. And really excited, again, part of that vibe that's coming to Irvington to really focus more and more on the arts. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us today. It was nice to be able to do this talk virtually so that we could still continue some of our program. Thank you very much, Bob, for doing the talk with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.